Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Premiership Quarter. Today, I'm going to be doing my round 18 tips and predictions for the AFL season, going through every game, talking a little bit about their form coming into it, a couple of things that I think might swing the game, including matchups or ins and outs based off of either injury or suspension, and then giving you my thoughts on who might win, and then also have a little look at the ladder at the end of the round, given how much congestion there is still in the middle. Before we get into it, I'll talk about my tips from last week. I tipped Collingwood by about 2 goals to get over Essendon, which they didn't. Essendon fought back really, really hard after not getting the game on their terms in the first quarter, but after that, it was completely on their terms. I then tipped Gold Coast to beat North Melbourne, and that was a bit unfortunate as they almost got over in the end, but just couldn't quite fight off a really resilient North Melbourne team who looked very, very good, I might add. I tipped Port Adelaide to beat the Bulldogs as I still don't trust the doggies, and it was at Adelaide Oval. I tipped Geelong to beat Hawthorn as I just still think Hawthorn, especially without Sicily, a bit too inexperienced. And down back, they looked like they were missing Sicily quite badly. I then tipped Carlton, who couldn't get over the line against GWS, even with a 5 goal lead at quarter time. I tipped Freo to beat Richmond in a pretty comfortable game. Same with Melbourne over West Coast. I didn't tip St Kilda, some would think surprisingly, to beat the Swans, but then again, it's the Swans. I was pretty happy either way. If I'd have tipped the Swans, then I would have been happy because I would have gotten my tip right. But if the Saints won, I was happy that the Saints won. So I was fine getting my tip wrong with that game. And then I tipped Brisbane to beat Adelaide. So I got 5 out of 9 in an all right week. And I just sort of think I maintained my position in the comps that I'm in. Before we get into the video, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, really help grow it, as I've got a lot more content coming as well. If you do enjoy it, leave a like on the video if you do like this style of video, and comment your thoughts below on who you might win. And with that being said, let's get straight into the video.
It came up behind him like a librarian. Jesus!
So we've got a very interesting round coming up after a round where there were a few upsets and a bit of ladder change. Um, we're starting off with what is also a very interesting game between Collingwood and Geelong, and I'm very much looking forward to this game. It could be something spectacular. We've had some really good games between these two clubs, especially in 2022. There were some awesome games when both teams were really good, and I think it'll be very interesting. I think the big question over Collingwood at the moment is definitely the defence, but also their midfield has been questioned. Zach Merritt especially tore them to pieces essentially in that game last week, and it'll be interesting to see what Dangerfield can do this week. I don't think there's anyone else who'll really go crazy like a what a Merritt did outside of Dangerfield. And so if someone from Collingwood goes to him, that'll be an interesting matchup. But outside of that, the back line of Collingwood coming up against a very energetic Geelong forward line at the moment is going to be very interesting. Who goes to Cameron will be the decision. Does a Billy Frampton go to him to be more of a lockdown? Does Charlie Dean keep his spot and go to him? I'd probably say no. It'll be very interesting, maybe even a Maynard, let him go up the ground with Cameron, and then when it gets to more inside 50, you put a Billy Frampton or Darcy Moore on him. It's going to be a tough decision for Craig McRae for sure. But I also think the ruck battle will be a bit decisive given how well Sam De Koning has been playing in there, come against a pretty underperforming Darcy Cameron at the moment, and then Nathan Kruger as a backup. Nothing exceptional, and if he can continue this form and have a really good game, I think this could really boost Geelong's chances. It doesn't appear to have too many outs for Geelong, which is good for them. But obviously, Myercheck being out is huge for Collingwood. It's going to be interesting to see how they line up forward because there's not going to be too many tools there. Maybe they have to chuck Billy Frampton back down there. Maybe he plays a role defensively on someone. Who knows? There's not really Tom Stewart there anymore, so that'll be interesting. I'm really struggling to find a genuine decider in this game, and it might be just the fact that it's Collingwood at the MCG. Um, I'm certainly leaning towards Collingwood more so, but the out of my check is a big factor for sure. I think I'm possibly going. I think with they've shown enough Collingwood without Myercheck to still be able to score, and I think they'll find a way to stop Cameron. And Geelong's midfield don't scare me enough outside of Dangerfield. I don't think they can have the impact that a Essendon midfield could have with like a Merit. So I'll go Collingwood by, let's say, 8 points. Next up is Hawthorn versus Fremantle down at York Park in Tassie. This is a very tough trip for Fremantle to make, coming off a win against Richmond. And it's good for Hawthorn to be able to be down in Tassie because it's a place where a lot of teams really struggle to travel down to. They've got a very good record down in Tassie, I believe. I think it's about 70% win rate there, which is really, really impressive. And it'll be interesting to see how they go against a very solid Fremantle squad. They've got Brennan Cox back now, and they will be missing Sean Darcy, unfortunately. So it'll be interesting to see who comes in for him. Maybe they go a bit smaller up forward with just Jackson, and then you've got Amiss and Tracy against a Hawthorn backline who isn't the biggest and not the most one-on-one ability, doesn't have the most one-on-one ability. So that'll be interesting. But the biggest thing for this game is definitely the midfield battle. You've got players like Will Day, John Newcomb, Connor Nash, James Warple, Cam McKenzie coming up against the likes of Nat Fife, Andy Brayshaw. You've got Caleb Sarong, Hayden Young, some really, really good young talent in there, surrounded by a couple more experienced, bigger bodies in the Nash and Fife types. So that'll be very interesting, and that should be where the game is won and lost. Fremantle, when they do win the clearances and by a fair bit, that's when they're at their best. And if they can get that, they'll definitely be in line to win this game. But I think it's a very tough trip for them to make down to Tassie, and I actually think that favours Hawthorn, and they should be able to bounce back if James Sicily is available. If he is, then I have them winning, but if he's not, I don't. And with that being said, I think I'll go Fremantle because I don't believe he will be playing because the injury list has not been released yet as I am recording this video. I'll tip them by just over 3 goals. Next up is Sydney versus North Melbourne at the SCG. And I think you could make an argument on form technically. North Melbourne are probably the more informed current team. They had just beaten Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium, and they had really challenged a couple good teams in Melbourne and Collingwood. Even though they're sitting out in the eight, they've still got the talent all the way to the end, basically getting 9 goals in front of Collingwood. And when you compare that to Sydney, who have now lost 2 in a row, and yes, it's only by 3 points, but they've still showed that their game isn't fully in effect at the moment. Their goal kicking has certainly been a bit of a worry. Logan McDonald has had 2 chances and butchered them both. The second one against the Saints just fading ever so slightly late. But I think their tools still haven't shown that they're able to genuinely impact games on a consistent basis. Amadi popped up and kicked 9, but outside of that for this season, I don't think he's honestly been anything more than slightly above average as a player. It's certainly affected his game because he's got more pressure on him. He's got probably one of the better opponents from the opposing team. Hayden Clean has certainly had a fall off in terms of kicking goals. And then Tom Papley also hasn't found the score sheet as consistently as he had in the year like 2022. So they've certainly hit the wall a little bit in their form and their scoring, but their midfield is still exceptional, and it's at the SCG, and I just don't see them losing 3 in a row. If they do, that's crazy. North Melbourne getting a win, that'd be exceptional. But I really think that their midfield need to get to work. I believe they'll have Callum Mills back as well, so that should be huge, as they sort of need it now with Isaac Heaney being out. So it's a good time, and I'll tip them to win by 28 points. Next up is the Bulldogs versus Carlton at Marvel Stadium. This is the Bulldogs coming off a smacking from Port Adelaide, and the Blues coming off I believe it was a 2 goal loss to GWS in the end, where they were up by just over 5 goals at quarter time, and then were down by 39 points at one stage. So if you work out the math, that's a 12-goal turnaround. That's impressive in what was like 2 quarters of football. So for them to get as badly beaten in the end, is what they did, I think is certainly not a fantastic result. They're going to be hoping on the injuries of Wiedering, who had a corked quad, and McGovern, who looked to be quite sore at the end of the game, if they want to be able to stay in the game. But also, if you want to talk about injuries, you've got the Bulldogs, who are going to be missing Norton and O'Donnell, which is certainly not a fantastic result for them after getting smacked anyway. The midfield battle will certainly be interesting. You've got Cripps and Walsh, who Cripps is probably in the form of his life at the moment. And then you've got Bontempelli and Trelaw. While the Bulldogs midfield got smashed on the weekend, expect them to bounce back in this game. But given the fact that there's going to be very few tools to be able to stay in the game with Mackay and Kerno up forward, given Kerno's faltered in the last couple of weeks, I think you'd expect them to have some huge games. And with that, I actually think that the Blues will be able to get over the line. I don't think there's enough from the Bulldogs to be able to say that they can stop those two. And I also think that Carlton Smalls now, with potentially Motlop coming back in, I think they needed to start Owies, not have him as the sub. I think that was the wrong call. I think they'll be able to also put a lot of pressure on the Bulldogs halfbacks. And I dare say Chincotta will go to Bailey Dell and really lock his game up. And that will stall the Bulldogs' ball movement. And so with De Koning being able to compete with the English, I think everything's favouring towards the Blues, which is why I'll have them winning by just over 20 points. Next up, we have the Demons facing the Bombers at the MCG in what should be a spectacular game. It's Melbourne who are coming off a good win, very solid win over the Eagles on the Sunday, not even afternoon game, the Sunday lunch game, 110. Was probably the worst time slot in the game, to be honest. Coming up against the Bombers, who got a very good win over the Pies on the Friday night. The Bombers have a bit more rest in this game with a technically 2-day advantage, given they played on the Friday night and then the Demons played on the Sunday lunch game. So that's a bit of an advantage to them. But the biggest thing for this game is obviously Max Gawn out with 2 to 3 weeks with a ankle problem, I believe. And that changes a lot. It probably gives Essendon a chance to be able to play two ruckmen potentially and really get an edge in the middle over Melbourne, with potentially Gosdeen coming back in to allow Draper to play a bit more up forward. Although Nate Caddy was very, very good up forward, providing another option and allowing Harrison Jones to play a bit more on the wing essentially, and being able to be that option, that outlet from half back on along those wings as the being that pressure release, essentially taking the marks along the wing. He was pretty good in that role, and he hasn't really showed a lot as a forward, and it's good for him to be able to potentially have that role and really grab it on board and take it by the scruff of the neck and potentially have that role for the next few years. But obviously, without Max Gawn, Melbourne are going to struggle heavily. I think Essendon might struggle to score against a still solid Melbourne backline, but without Gawn, I genuinely don't know what Melbourne are going to do. It might be playing Josh Shackey because I still don't know if Tom Fullerton is fully healthy. They picked him up in the off-season to play as a backup ruckman or even as a forward ruck. But they're definitely going to be ruling not having Brody Grundy there or even someone else who's probably more like a Tom Campbell as a backup ruckman, try and pry him away, see if they can get something like that. So it's going to be very difficult for them to get it out of the middle. And that's probably why I have Essendon winning, because they're going to be able to get some dominance in the middle. And that actually puts them technically at this stage, let's say just about 3 goals. Oh, never mind, puts them at 4th. Oh well, sucks to be an Essendon fan. Next up, we have Adelaide versus St Kilda at the Adelaide Oval. Adelaide coming off a not disappointing loss, but a frustrating loss to Brisbane up at the Gabba. It's something most people would have expected, but they were in it for majority of the game. They came back and got within a goal, I believe, during around the third quarter. I wasn't watching it. I was watching the Saints game and then watched the Saints replay, as all Saints fans do. And then the Saints obviously coming off a very good win against Sydney by 2 points, 84 to 82, getting the win just a bit of inaccurate kicking from the Swans, but they also got a few free kicks in their favour. It's a very impressive performance. Probably the biggest standout was Mateus Philippou. He, coming back after a month in the VFL, was really, really impressive. 26 touches, over 700 metres gained, 10 score involvements and a goal for a 19-year-old. That's very, very impressive. and he was a real boost to the Saints squad. Can't forget the impact of Jimmy Webster, who I thought was spectacular on Tom Papley. And he also was involved at times going forward, had some really important moments, and his hands in the air were great. But also Dougal Howard, that goal saving dive, well, not dive, but touch right at the third quarter, I believe, just after Sydney, the quarter had started and just before we got on a roll. Felt like a change in tides. He jumped into the crowd and saved a goal, and that was huge as well. I thought he was very impressive on return. But for this game, it's obviously going to be without Rankin for Adelaide. And given the performances they've had and they've shown when he's not playing, I don't think there's too much promise for Adelaide in this game. Obviously, they're still at home, and that's a big benefactor for them. It's very helpful, especially against St Kilda, who don't necessarily perform excellently at the Adelaide Oval against Adelaide. They definitely struggled last year. I think they got blown out by almost 10 goals. And they said St Kilda have certainly struggled to take up the challenge in the Adelaide Oval against Adelaide, but I think they'll be able to do it this year. They showed that they can be more efficient, turning the ball over in the forward half and scoring from it. It was a real struggle for them in the first 15 weeks, but basically, I think they were 17th or 18th watching the first crack, and I saw that stat. And it certainly shows that when watching the game, it's so frustrating to happen week after week, and you still can't find a solution. And when you do, like against Brisbane, you still can't win. But I think they'll be able to get this win. I hope they get this win because maybe it starts a surge. We've got West Coast next week, and maybe we can really start to get going at the back end of the season, and potentially only be a couple games out of the 8 by the end of it. Who knows? But I think the Saints get the win. I think they'll be able to hold up defensively well and be able to score enough, given the signs they showed against Sydney, to be able to get a 2.5 goal win. Then we've got Gold Coast versus Port Adelaide up at Carrara Stadium. Gold Coast very, very disappointing against North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. And then Port Adelaide very, very impressive at Adelaide Oval against the Western Bulldogs. What do you take out of this game? No Jared Witts for Gold Coast, no Took Miller for Gold Coast. They're two co-captains out. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. But I think it's honestly not going to be a bad thing for them. It shows that some of their younger players, someone like Mac Andrew, Noah Anderson, Matt Rowell, it shows that they need to stand up if they want to be able to actually contend. They need to win this game if they want to potentially make finals this year, because it's still plausible for them to do it. However, without their two leaders, someone's going to stand up. Maybe it's a Sam Collins and a Charlie Ballard really forcing Port Adelaide to not find many solutions up forward. Maybe it's a Ben King, or maybe it's a Ben Ainsworth. Who knows? I think they need to find something. But I think they need to do it this week, especially given the pressure Damien Hardwick's put on them, having that outburst in the media where he said, we need to fucking grow up as a club. It's true, but it's a big thing to say in the media. And I really hope they do come out and make a statement. If you compare that to Port Adelaide, they responded when their coach was under pressure. And I don't think Damien Hardwick's under pressure per se, but the playing list certainly is for Gold Coast. And maybe they can learn something from Port Adelaide. They just need to be able to stay in this contest, Port Adelaide, because I think they can get the win late. It's going to be tough because it's up there. Their forward line will need to be as impressive as it was last week. I don't know if it will, because I still trust the Gold Coast defenders, especially up there, to really make it difficult for them. And maybe their midfield doesn't have as crazy a game as it does this week. But there's going to be no Sam Day as well for Gold Coast up forward. I'd assume either Ethan Reid or Jed Walter comes in to replace him. I don't know if Jed Walter's healthy. Maybe that's why he's not playing, but I think he probably should be. And then I think it's going to be tough for Adelaide to potentially lock down Ben King. So even with them losing to North Melbourne, I actually have the Gold Coast Suns winning this game. It normally is close, honestly, between these two teams, and so I'll have it by 5 points Gold Coast winning and probably keeping their season alive. Next is Richmond versus GWS at the MCG. Richmond coming off a disappointing loss against Fremantle over there, and GWS coming off a very impressive win against Carlton in Sydney. Richmond just get absolutely butchered every week with health. Toby Nankervis was excellent for them, though. really, really impressive. Their midfield wasn't fantastic by any means, but they're coming up against a very solid one in Fremantle. I didn't watch the game. I don't know where it's at for Richmond. They look to be going going down, not even getting too much better. It's a really tough for Adam Uze at the moment. There's not a lot to really look out for. Shea Bolton kicked 4 goals, so there's something there, but there's just a lot of downers surrounding the club at the moment. And then GWS, after being down by 5 goals a quarter time, really dug deep and fought hard to be able to come back and get a really solid win, a much needed win, I might add, against Carlton, a real contender. A big reason for that was Kieran Briggs, and as I mentioned, Toby Nankervis was very impressive. So that ruck battle is going to be very, very important to this game. Then you've got the midfield who are going to be feeding off it: Taranto, Hopper. I don't know if Presti is available, but Bolton, Baker coming up against Green, Cornelio, Ward, number 17, Callahan for the Giants. It's going to be very difficult for them to be able to stay in the game. And GWS, given their really impressive win over Carlton, they look to have turned the page potentially, and maybe they go on a run like they did at the back end of last year and get back into the 8 and push for top 4, given how close it is. And I think they'll get the win. And given how dour Richmond have been, I think it could very easily push past 5 goals. And then the final game is West Coast versus Brisbane at Perth Stadium. Jeremy McGovern went to hospital after the Eagles game against Melbourne, and that's obviously going to be a big talking point if he's able to stay fit and be playing against the Brisbane Lions, because I believe the replacement coming in would be someone like Harry Edwards, and that's certainly not fantastic coming up against a very, very in-form Brisbane Lions forward line. You've got Hipwood, you've got Danaher, you've got Logan Morris, who's still been impressive. So it's definitely going to be tough. I think Brisbane are going to have to really push the Eagles because it is at home, and the midfield battle will certainly be interesting. Does the Eagles put Dom Sheed to Lockie Neal, because he's done it a couple times this season, given how he has not been at his best? I think they need to put someone to him because he's obviously shown that he's fantastic and that he needs to be tagged if you want to stop Brisbane. But I also think Josh Dunkley will go to Harley Reid, and he'll definitely be able to quell him enough to be able to get the Lions a win. I also think that there's a couple good matchups in the Brisbane backline against this Eagles forward line. Ryan Lester, I think, has been very impressive this year, and he'll probably take the Jake Waterman assignment. And then you've also got Harris Andrews, who could potentially go to Oscar Allen. And I think that's very, very important for them to be able to stop West Coast from scoring, to stop their two main outputs, because at one stage, they were the only two West Coast goal scorers. But it's pretty obvious that the Lions will get this win. They're in a really good bit of form, 5 wins in a row, and they should be able to continue it with a 28-point win over the Eagles. That's going to finish up the round. If you take a look at the ladder, Sydney is still 2 games on top with a good win over North Melbourne. Then you've got a 2-point lead from Carlton over Essendon and Brisbane. And then you've got a little bit of a gap between Essendon and Brisbane, which is good. A top 4 potentially showing signs of a gap. But Brisbane in 5th is huge for them. They've got a home final at least, and now they can push to get a home final in and a double chance in the last few rounds. Got GWS back in the finals, top 6. Geelong staying in there. Collingwood as well with the win over Geelong, being pushed into the 8, and Port Adelaide pushing out. You've got Gold Coast, Melbourne, Bulldogs, all as well as Hawthorn, all sort of in a muddle. Then you've got St Kilda sitting on 7 wins, only 1 game behind 12th in the Bulldogs, and 3 games behind Port Adelaide in 9th. So maybe they can push and really go on a run. But that's going to be the end of this video. If you do enjoy it, please hit the like button and really help push this video in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to my channel if you like this type of content. There's going to be a lot more coming your way. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.